Welcome to this musical series analysis of the music of Majora's Mask. Today I'll break down the exciting boss battle theme, this time composed by Toru Minegishi. Toru composed all the battle tracks in Majora's Mask, that being the normal enemy theme, the mini-boss theme, and this boss battle theme. At the time of release, Toru was only 25 years old, and he had the tremendous experience working alongside Koji Kondo. Later, Toru would go on to be the lead composer for Twilight Princess, which is a nice passing of the torch from master to student. Let's see how Toru Minegishi's style is different from Koji Kondo's. The boss battle theme will use a small orchestral arrangement of instruments. We have our three primary percussion instruments with the timpani, the snare, and the cymbals. The piano is there only to accent certain passages in this tune. The small brass family here will use the French horns and the trumpets. Then we have our string family, the violins, cellos, double bass. Then to bring in a woodwind instrument, the piccolo will highlight certain notes. One interesting thing to note is the odd time signature used in this piece. The intro begins in 4/4, but most of the tune will use 7/4 time. In fact, later in section 4, we'll switch to a wackier 11/4 time signature. These odd time signatures often find their home in battle music due to their unpredictability. This unpredictability makes the listener slightly uncomfortable and more in alert, which is exactly what the boss battle theme should provide. One last thought while looking at this overview is the overall structure of how the song loops. Instead of the song beginning straight away into the beat, Minegishi includes an intro to begin the boss fight. To me, this adds an excitement and anticipation for the boss battle when the music swells up into this great stinger that surprises the player. The intro to Majora's Mask's boss battle opens with a cacophony of intensity, with nearly every instrument playing near the top of their velocity. However, this intro becomes actually easy to dissect when we break it down into two sections. First, the timpani, the piano, the cellos, and the double bass all strike hard on these beats. If we look at the notes themselves, you can see Toru uses a tritone interval in this jump to the last note, the A to the D sharp. If you're wondering what these notes up here are, these are the key switches that change the articulation of the note. For example, the first half is shorter staccato notes, while the second half, the C sharp, switches to legato. The second section I mentioned will counteract on the upbeats. These include the cymbals, the French horns, trumpets, violins, and piccolo. Take note that all of these instruments play in the high range, giving a great contrast to the deeper downbeats. Toru uses an interesting technique by adding grace notes just before the final note. Grace notes further increase the intensity and add a bit of flourish to them as well. With those two sections in mind, let's take a listen to this section combined. Section 1 will start off small, but gradually grow back its intensity. This is a great decision, especially coming off the powerful intro. Snares are the newest instrument introduced, which play this triplet pattern. For the most part, the snares will continue this throughout the song to keep the driving rhythm high. We have our melody staccato hits coming from the French horns and the trumpets together. One intriguing problem I had during this section was keeping these French horn notes extremely short. Before, the notes extended too long, so I fixed this by going into the instrument settings. For example, here in Metropolis Ark's French horns and the trumpets. In the settings, you can adjust the attack all the way to the left, and then I adjusted the release just a little bit so there's no decay of the sound still left. Compare this with the original settings versus after the adjustment. So this is the original settings. And then with the adjustments, as for the melody itself, Toru has a very identifiable quirk about his composing style. He is a huge proponent of repeating phrases of melody. Notice, for example, how he repeats this D note again and again. How can he do this without sounding too repetitive? First, he employs variation often. In this case, every measure has a different ending than before. So in this case, he goes down, and the next he goes up. Second, he'll use modulation, which is switching to a different key. This is shown in the second half of section 1, when Toru switches from the D to now the G. And again from G now to A. Both of these are very useful techniques in writing melodies that repeat: variation and modulation. The last instrument we'll discuss here is the double bass, coming right in front of the mix with these ominous half steps. Interestingly, the bass sort of follows the same up and down pattern as the brass, but also smartly accompanies the snare as well. Listen with the snare combined. Just before we reach section 2, the timpani join in, playing forceful hits every measure. As you can see here, they'll crescendo and roll up. Take that all into account while we listen to section 1. Section 2 will reminisce back to the intro with this impressively short section. Like before, we can easily separate this into 3 sections this time, although the snares are just their own section. Looking at the bass instruments, it's the familiar gang of timpani, piano, cellos, and double bass, playing the exact same notes as the intro. However, for the higher end instruments, they have a different variation with this nice quick succession of notes. And let's take a listen to this section. Returning to a slightly more calming section, section 3 strips down to only snares, French horns, and double bass. Instead of the staccato notes of section 1, the horns use legato notes to give a more sonorous sound. The horns are composed in 2 voices, with the harmony of both utilizing different intervals between each other. Mostly they're played in minor thirds, such as here, but they do use tritones between this D and G sharp and the next note. If we gaze our attention down to the double bass, you might think it's playing the same pattern as before, but Toru will keep continually modulating the bass every 2 measures. In the second half of section 3, it will keep descending downward until we reach our next section. Right in the middle that separates each half is another sudden flurry of notes. The trumpets will prepare us by jumping down another tritone interval there, before the timpani, trumpets, violin, and piccolo will play short grace notes. After that, the strings take over the lead melody in place of the horns, playing exactly the same thing. And just before we finish out this section, the brass instruments come back to combine together to lead us into section 4. Now let's give this section a full playthrough. With the sudden time signature shift to 11/4, this section 4 feels incredibly active and strong. Looking at the top with the timpani, Toru utilizes the timpani's pitches to accent the offbeats, while striking the downbeats with the lower C notes. What is incredibly interesting about the snare in conjunction with the timpani is that when you slow the tempo down, you'll notice how every half measure, the snares will go from striking directly on the downbeats to now striking on the upbeats instead. This is a very unusual choice to change the rhythm in this way, but it further increases the unpredictability of this section. Our next instrument group will use the brass to accent the D note, and repeat this certain phrase 2 more times. Again, using the repetition technique Toru likes to throw in. To further increase intensity, Toru also adds the violins in the second half to double exactly what the brass play before finishing out this section. Finally, the cellos and double bass each double in this unique pattern. The notes move chromatically downward once they reach the top C sharp, and then accent these 2 beats here, and then repeat the pattern 2 more times. This fits incredibly well with the timpani. Now let's listen to section 4 in full. Our last section today will conclude with section 5, which again strips back to a select few instruments. This time the French horns and the violins will double each other using these ominous fourth intervals. Almost reminding me of Ganondorf's theme. Both the snares and the double bass will use the exact same pattern as in section 1 to prepare us for the loop point. Now let's take a final listen to section 5. Thank you for using your time wisely and watching this analysis of Majora's Mask. Toru Minegishi, despite being the newcomer to the Nintendo composing scene, and composing alongside the legend Koji Kondo, brought his own unique style into the Legend of Zelda series. The 3 tracks he wrote for Majora's Mask stand right alongside Kondo's tunes and melds perfectly together. Overall, the techniques we can learn from Toru's boss battle theme are his repetitious but always varying and modulating melodies. Also, how he includes an intro to the song to excite the player to begin the boss battle. And then finally, how he constantly uses doubling multiple instruments together to produce an intense sound. Thank you to everyone who has supported me and this channel through Patreon. Your vote of support directly helps me to produce these analysis videos and learn more about the great video game composers, both past and present. Thank you, and I'll catch you all in the next episode of Music Design.